It started as a normal walk home. Clara had stayed late at the office, the kind of late that made the streets unusually quiet. Streetlights flickered, casting uneven shadows across the sidewalk, but she had walked this route 100 times and never felt unsafe before. That night, though, something felt off. At first it was subtle. Footsteps behind her, just faint enough to dismiss. She glanced over her shoulder. Nothing. Just the empty street stretching behind her. She shrugged, quickened her pace, telling herself she was imagining things. But then the footsteps sped up. Not to match her stride, faster. There was a rhythm to them, deliberate, patient, almost waiting. Her heart started to hammer. She tried to ignore it, telling herself the city was full of people walking alone at night. But something about the quiet, the emptiness, made it feel different. Clara turned another corner. The streetlight above flickered again. And then she heard it. Clara. Her breath caught. She froze. The voice was soft, almost casual, but it was her name. Her full name. And she hadn't said it out loud. "Who's there?" she called, trying to keep her voice steady, though it shook at the edges. There was a pause. Then the voice came again, closer this time. "You shouldn't have lied to your boss today." Her stomach dropped. Her hands shook. No one else knew about the small lie she told at work. Just a harmless excuse to leave early. Clara spun around. The street was empty. Her apartment building was still 2 blocks ahead, but the street behind her was deserted. Her phone was in her hand, trembling. She considered calling the police, but then, "Your roommate thinks you're coming home later, doesn't she?" She froze. She hadn't told anyone. Not even her roommate. The footsteps started again, light but precise, echoing off the empty walls of the alley she had to pass. Panic clawed at her chest. Clara started walking faster. Then jogging. Then she broke into a run. "Wait," the voice said, calm, almost teasing. "You forgot to lock your apartment last night? You're lucky no one came in." She stopped dead. Her keychain jingled as she fumbled for her keys. She thought about the past few nights, about the uneasy feeling she had ignored. Someone had been in her apartment, watching, knowing things she never told anyone. The street seemed to stretch endlessly. The shadows of trees and fire escapes flickered like moving shapes. Clara's mind raced. Could it be a prank? Someone stalking her for fun? But the details were impossibly specific. She had no enemies, no one who knew her routine, no one with access to her life, except someone who had been there. She reached her building and ripped open the door, bolting up the stairs. Her apartment door trembled under her hand as she locked it behind her. Her chest heaving, she leaned against the door, trying to convince herself she was safe. Then came the knock. 3 soft raps. Clara's eyes went wide. Her heart stopped. She didn't answer. She told herself not to. She backed away, looking for something to defend herself with. "Clara," the voice said again, perfectly calm. "I know you're alone. I've been waiting." Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She grabbed it and turned on the flashlight. The beam landed on nothing. The hallway was empty. She stumbled back to her apartment door, fumbling with the lock. Every instinct screamed to leave, but where could she go? The streets outside were empty. The shadows outside her windows seemed to shift. She realized with a sinking dread that the footsteps, the voice, the knowledge, it wasn't just outside. It was inside her life. Her secrets, her routines, her fears, they all belonged to someone else now. Clara sank to the floor, trembling. The knocks continued, slow and deliberate. She couldn't see them, but she could feel them. And then, silence. Minutes passed. She convinced herself it had been her imagination. That maybe the stress of work, the loneliness, had conjured a phantom. But just as she exhaled, relieved, her phone rang. No caller ID. She answered it, voice barely a whisper. "Clara?" said the voice. Up close, unmistakably inside the building. "I've been waiting." The line went dead. Her eyes darted to the window. Across the street, in the apartment opposite hers, a figure stood still. watching, waiting. And then she noticed the detail that made her blood run cold. The figure held a notebook. On the cover, written in neat handwriting, was her full name. The lights flickered, and in that instant, the figure vanished. But Clara knew it hadn't gone far. Someone, somewhere, was inside every corner of her life now. Watching, knowing, waiting. She never walked home alone again. And every time the door clicked shut behind her, she swore she could hear soft footsteps, just beyond the walls of her apartment, repeating the secrets she thought only she knew. Because someone did. The first thing anyone would notice about the Bellamy house was how quiet it was. Not the comfortable kind of quiet you expect in a big, wealthy home, but the heavy, unnatural silence that seemed to swallow every sound before it reached your ears. It was exactly the kind of place that made Emily, a 17-year-old babysitter, feel small the moment she stepped onto the polished marble floors. She had been hired for the evening by the Bellamys, an affluent couple who traveled frequently and trusted Emily to watch their 2 children. The youngest, Lily, was 6 and the older boy, Max, was 8. Both had been asleep when she arrived, tucked neatly into their rooms with the kind of perfection only money and privilege could buy. The first hour passed uneventfully. Emily straightened the living room, checked the locks on the doors and windows, and even tidied the kitchen. She told herself it was just another night, just a quiet babysitting job. Then she noticed the first note. It was on the fridge, written in crayon in a childlike scrawl she didn't recognize. "Come play with us." Her stomach twisted. She knew Lily and Max were asleep. Emily assumed it was one of their usual pranks, maybe a leftover joke from a previous babysitter. She crumpled the note and tossed it into the trash. But then more appeared. One on the bathroom mirror, "Don't go to bed." Another on the hallway table, "We're watching." Emily froze. The handwriting was all different. Some letters jagged, some smudged, but all unnervingly childish. She went to check on the kids. Their doors were still closed. Lily's night light glowed softly, and Max's blanket was tucked under his chin. They were asleep. "Okay," she whispered to herself, trying to sound confident. "Probably just a prank. Some kid from next door, or maybe I'm imagining things." She returned to the living room and tried to focus on her phone. That's when she heard it, a soft giggle. It came from upstairs. Her heart stopped. Emily froze, listening. The house was quiet again. She called out, her voice shaking slightly. "Lily? Max?" No response. Just silence. The giggle came again, louder this time, echoing down the hallway. Emily's hands shook as she crept toward the stairs. She told herself to breathe. Maybe it was the wind. Maybe it was the house settling. Then she saw it. At the top of the stairs, in the dim light spilling from the hallway, 2 small figures stood. Lily and Max, or at least they looked like them. But their eyes. Emily couldn't explain it. Their eyes were empty, dark, unnaturally still. "Emily, play with us," they said in unison, their voices soft and too precise, like something rehearsed. Emily stumbled backward. You're supposed to be asleep." They tilted their heads in perfect, synchronized motion. "We don't sleep." Panic surged. She grabbed her phone and ran to the front door, yanking at the handle. Locked. The doors were all locked. She hadn't touched them, yet it was impossible to open them. Then came the whispering, from every direction at once. Words she couldn't fully make out, but the tone was unmistakable. Watching. Waiting. Hungry. Emily sprinted to the living room, heart hammering, and slammed herself against the window. It was solid. She was trapped. Then the shadows moved. The 2 children, or whatever they were, glided silently across the upper hallway, their forms stretching unnaturally. And from behind them, more figures emerged, small, indistinct, whispering in the same terrible chorus. Emily backed into the kitchen, searching desperately. Her eyes caught the fridge. The first note, the one she had thrown away, had reappeared on the door. And beneath it, new words, fresh and wet looking. "You can't leave. You never slept." The air grew cold, biting at her skin. The lights flickered. She turned toward the staircase. The figures were at the bottom now, waiting, smiling too widely. She screamed, pounding on the front door. But no one came. And then she realized, the children upstairs weren't there anymore. She had seen them, but now they were gone. Only the whispers remained. Suddenly the front door clicked. She turned, hope flaring, but froze. There was no one there. Only a note lying on the welcome mat outside. Emily's trembling hands picked it up. Written in the same childlike scrawl. "Next time it's your bedtime." Emily never returned to the Bellamy house. The family didn't call back. And when the neighbors were asked if they had heard anything unusual that night, they all shook their heads. No screams. No laughter. Just the silence. Some say that if you pass by the Bellamy house after dark, you can hear giggles echoing from the upstairs windows. And if you listen closely, the whispers call your name, inviting you to play. And nobody ever answers. The weekend had felt ordinary, the kind of ordinary that lulls you into forgetting just how fragile normal life is. James had been looking forward to it, a short trip out of town to visit family. He packed his bags Friday night, double-checked the locks, and left his suburban street behind. Nothing about the neighborhood seemed unusual as he drove away. He waved to Mrs. Carter watering her front garden, and to the Jenkins kids playing on the sidewalk. Everything was the same as always, or so he thought. When he returned Sunday evening, the first thing he noticed was silence. Not the usual quiet that comes with a sleepy suburb, but the kind of silence that presses against your chest. No distant lawnmowers. No barking dogs. No music. Nothing. Just the hum of his car engine and the soft rustling of the wind through empty streets. James frowned, gripping the steering wheel a little tighter. He slowed down. Every driveway he passed was empty. Every porch unlit. The neighbors' cars, normally parked haphazardly in driveways, were gone. Even the streetlights seemed duller, flickering weakly as if unsure whether to stay on. He parked in front of his own house and stepped out. The door was locked, exactly as he had left it. He leaned on the handle for a moment, listening, thinking maybe he was imagining things. Maybe everyone had left town for the weekend. But even then the silence felt wrong, too complete, too unnatural. James finally pushed the door open and stepped inside. The familiar scent of his home was comforting, but the quiet that followed was almost deafening. He flicked on lights as he moved from room to room. Everything was in place. Nothing was missing. But he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, or worse, that he shouldn't be there. He decided to check the neighbors' houses, thinking maybe someone would be outside, mowing the lawn or taking out the trash. But when he walked back onto the street, the emptiness hit harder than before. Houses sat untouched, porches empty. Cars that had been parked days ago, a mailbox full of letters, all gone. It was as if everyone had vanished. No note, no explanation, no trace. It wasn't until he reached the Carter house that he found something. On the front door, taped neatly, was a single sheet of paper. He hesitated before picking it up, his fingers trembling slightly. The words were written in a neat, deliberate script. "We had to leave. Don't follow." James laughed nervously, but the sound was hollow. He called out, hoping someone would respond. "Mrs. Carter? Jenkins? Anyone?" Only silence answered him. The note didn't explain why, or where, or who we were. He went from house to house, finding the same message taped to every front door. And then, in the Jenkins driveway, something made him freeze. A lone red bicycle lying on its side, no child in sight. The faint tire marks suggested it hadn't been there long, but it was the only evidence that someone had ever been there at all. No cars, no people. Nothing else. By now, James's heart was pounding. He felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Something about the way the street seemed to hold its breath made him uneasy. He considered calling the police but stopped himself. What would he even say? All my neighbors disappeared? It sounded insane. Who would believe him? As the sun dipped below the horizon, shadows lengthening across the empty lawns, James noticed a figure at the end of the street. At first, he thought it was a neighbor returning, maybe someone forgot something. But the figure didn't move like a person. It stood unnaturally still, almost blending into the darkness. "Hello?" James called out, trying to keep his voice steady. The figure didn't respond. Slowly, almost cautiously, he started walking toward it. The closer he got, the more he realized it wasn't a neighbor at all. It was someone, or something, standing rigid, too tall, limbs too long, face impossible to make out. And then, before he could react, it moved. Not toward him, but into the first house on the left. James froze, realizing the front door swung shut behind it. He ran, pounding on doors, shouting, but every house was the same. Empty. Silent. The note's warning echoed in his mind, "Don't follow." He stumbled to his own front door, fumbled with the keys, and finally got inside. Shivering, he locked every door and window, sliding down against the wall, heart hammering. And that's when he noticed the mailbox, yours, his own, was empty. And yet, lying across his kitchen table, exactly like the others, was a single sheet of paper. "We had to leave. Don't follow." A gust of wind rattled the windows, and James realized the silence outside had changed. It wasn't empty anymore. Faint footsteps, hundreds of them, circling the houses. But there was no one to see. No one at all. And then, at the corner of the street, he saw movement. The shadows were returning, but this time they weren't shadows. They were the neighbors, or at least what had once been them. Faces blank, bodies moving in jerky, unnatural ways, circling, watching, waiting. And no matter how tightly he shut the doors, he knew somehow that the silence would never come back. James never left his house again. And sometimes, late at night, neighbors would return, just far enough to tap on the window, whisper a name, and vanish into the darkness before anyone could answer. And the street? Empty. Always empty. When Emma moved into the old Victorian house on the edge of town, it felt perfect at first. The ceilings were high, the sunlight streamed through the tall windows, and the creaky wooden floors gave the place character, not a sense of unease. She was excited. This was her first home on her own, and she imagined herself making it her own little sanctuary. The first few days were uneventful, just the usual unpacking and arranging furniture. But on the third night, just as she was about to drift off, she heard it. A faint whisper coming from below. "Emma?" At first, she froze, heart thudding. Maybe it was the wind or the old pipes settling. The house was old after all. She told herself that. She even laughed quietly at her own paranoia. But then it happened again later that night, clearer this time. "Emma?" She grabbed her phone and flicked on the flashlight. The sound seemed to come from the basement, the one part of the house she hadn't explored yet. That basement, it didn't have a door. There was only a wide opening, half hidden behind a stack of old boxes, dark as midnight. She had assumed it was just storage space, nothing more. Emma tried to rationalize it. "Maybe it's just the house settling," she muttered to herself. But the whispers grew louder, more insistent over the next few nights. Sometimes it sounded like someone was right behind her, whispering her name, yet every time she spun around, the hallway was empty. By the fifth night, she couldn't ignore it. She told a friend about it over the phone, describing the voice. Her friend tried to be reassuring. "It's probably just echoes or maybe some old wiring or pipes. You know, something explainable." But Emma knew, this didn't feel explainable. That night she made a decision. She was going to face it. She grabbed a flashlight and went down the narrow stairs to the basement. The air was cold, heavier than the rest of the house, and smelled faintly of damp earth and something else, something metallic. The beam of her flashlight cut through the darkness, landing on old furniture, boxes, and shadows that seemed to twist in impossible ways. And then she heard it again. "Emma?" Her skin prickled. The voice wasn't echoing. It was coming from deep inside the basement, somewhere behind where the stairs ended. But as she stepped forward, her flashlight revealed nothing. Just walls, boxes, and the floor stretching into empty darkness. "Hello?" she called, trying to keep her voice steady. No answer. Just silence. Emma shone the light everywhere, her chest tightening with fear. That's when she noticed it, a faint outline in the corner of the basement wall. At first she thought it was just a shadow. Then she realized it wasn't on the wall. It was the wall. There was no door. No opening. But the outline looked exactly like the shape of a doorway, as if someone had been there recently or maybe had disappeared into it. Her flashlight flickered. For a moment, the basement seemed to ripple, like the air itself was breathing. And then the whisper came again, right at her ear. "Emma, come down." She stumbled back, heart racing. Something was inside the wall. She could feel it. Her rational mind screamed that it was impossible, that walls couldn't speak, couldn't pull her in. And yet, the voice was insistent, almost pleading now, soft but urgent. Emma ran back upstairs, slammed the hatch shut, and bolted her bedroom door. She didn't sleep that night. Or the night after. Every whisper, every creak of the house felt like it was calling her back. Finally, she called the previous owner. An old man, living in a small apartment across town. When she explained the voice, he didn't laugh. Instead, his face went pale. You shouldn't have gone down there," he said, voice trembling. "That basement, it doesn't have a door for a reason. Something lives behind that wall. It's not alive like us. But it watches. It waits. And sometimes, it calls." Emma asked what he meant. He hesitated, then whispered, "When I lived there, I thought I heard it too. But I was brave. Or stupid. I went down once. It whispered my name, and I never went near the basement again. Some doors, Emma, they're meant to stay closed. Some voices are never meant to be answered." That night she didn't answer. She stayed in her room, lights on, phone clutched to her chest, waiting for dawn. But the whispers never stopped. Weeks later, Emma vanished. The house was quiet when the neighbors called the police. There was no sign of forced entry. No footprints. Just the basement, dark and empty, the walls smooth and unbroken, except for one thing. A faint outline of a door and a single word scrawled in the dust. "Emma?" And no one ever saw her again. It started like any other Friday night. A crowded house, music pulsing, people laughing and shouting over each other. Drinks clinked, lights flashed, and conversations collided in a chaotic symphony. Everyone knew someone, or at least thought they did. And then there was Alex. He had come with a friend, trying to forget the week that had left him drained, but by the time he stepped through the doorway, a strange unease had already settled over him. At first he shrugged it off. Parties always felt overwhelming. But then he noticed it, the feeling that someone was watching him. He scanned the room, his eyes darting past familiar faces, but everyone was too busy with their own world, smiling, drinking, dancing. No one paid him any attention. And yet, the feeling persisted. He tried to shake it. Maybe it was just anxiety or too much coffee, or the way the lights made shadows twist unnaturally against the walls. He moved to the kitchen to get a drink, but as he passed the hallway, he thought he saw movement in the corner of his eye. A figure standing just behind the living room doorway. He spun around. Nothing. Just empty space. "Alex, you okay?" His friend called from across the room, a grin plastered on his face. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm fine," Alex lied, forcing a laugh. "Just crowded in here, I guess." But as he moved back to the crowd, he noticed it again. A shadow, or a person, always just beyond his vision. Across the living room, near the staircase by the doorway to the backyard. Every time he turned his head, the space was empty, but the sensation of being tracked was growing heavier, like someone was tracing every step he took. He tried to focus on the music, on the conversations, anything to ignore the creeping dread. But then he started catching glances. Out of the corner of his eye, he'd see someone staring at him, standing still among the dancing bodies. And every time he looked directly, there was nothing. By the third hour, Alex was tense. He ducked into a quieter room, trying to convince himself he was imagining it. The house was huge and most of the partygoers were crammed downstairs. He thought he'd find a moment of peace upstairs. But as he leaned against the wall and exhaled, he heard it, the faintest whisper of movement behind him. He spun around. Empty hallway. No footsteps. No sound. Just silence. And then a voice, quiet but distinct, cutting through the quiet. "Don't leave." Alex froze. His heart pounded. He called out, but no one answered. The house was loud, chaotic, yet upstairs it was still, eerily still. He tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was someone playing a joke. Maybe he had too much to drink. But then the feeling returned, the weight of unseen eyes just beyond his vision. He ran back downstairs. The music, the laughter, the crowded rooms, it should have been comforting, but it wasn't. Every room felt like a trap. Every turn of the hallway felt like someone was waiting just out of reach. And then he saw it again. A figure, partially obscured by the shadows, standing silently by the doorway to the patio. He blinked. Gone. "Alex, seriously, you're freaking me out," his friend said, grabbing his shoulder. "Stop staring at people." "I'm not. I swear I keep seeing someone," Alex muttered. But no one believed him. Everyone laughed it off, patting him on the back. Determined, he decided to confront it. He moved toward the staircase, toward the last spot he'd seen the figure. His pulse racing, he called out, "Hey, who's there?" Silence. The shadows seemed to twist around him, almost breathing. And then, finally, he saw it, clearer than ever. A man, tall, pale, standing at the top of the stairs. Completely still. Completely silent. Eyes locked on Alex. Not moving. Just watching. Alex froze. The room around him blurred. He wanted to scream, to run, but his legs refused. And then the man smiled. Slow, deliberate. Not friendly. Not human. The lights flickered. Alex blinked. The man was gone. Shaking, Alex turned, trying to find his friend. But the crowded room had changed. The laughter, the music, it was all distorted now. Every face he passed looked identical, blank, staring, as if each person was waiting for him to notice something. He ran to the door, pushing through the crowd. The front porch was empty. The street was quiet. No music, no voices, just the night air and the distant hum of traffic. He ran, not looking back. The next day, Alex swore he told people what happened. But the house, the party, everyone there, no one remembered him at all. His friend didn't recall bringing him. The party seemed like it had never happened. Weeks later, he got a text. No sender. No number. Just a message. "I see you." And that's when Alex realized it wasn't about the party. It wasn't about being in the crowd. It was about him. And no one else could see. She had always liked the quiet evenings at her apartment. The small space on the fourth floor of a brick building in the city felt safe, cozy even. After work, she would make tea, scroll through social media, maybe watch a show or two. Nothing ever felt threatening. At least, nothing until the package arrived. It was just after 7 in the evening when the buzzer rang. She frowned, glancing at the small pile of bills and junk mail on the counter. No one ever visited her building without warning. She opened the door to find a plain brown box. No markings except her name in neat, almost mechanical handwriting. There was no return address. Confused, she picked it up, turning it over in her hands. The box was light, almost suspiciously so. She carried it to the kitchen table, set it down, and hesitated. Part of her wanted to just leave it there, maybe even call the building manager, but curiosity won. She slid a box cutter across the tape, the blade whispering through the paper. Inside, carefully laid on top of some crumpled packing paper, was a photograph. At first, she thought it was one of those old Polaroids, but the image quality was sharper than she expected. Her stomach twisted as she recognized herself, sleeping. Her eyes were closed, blanket pulled up to her chin. The familiar pattern of the quilt. the small lamp on the nightstand casting a warm glow across the room. She blinked. That was her bedroom. She hadn't taken that photo. She hadn't given anyone permission to take it. Her fingers trembled as she lifted the photograph closer to the light, turning it over. No message. No signature. Nothing. Her mind raced. Maybe it was a prank? A neighbor with a camera? But who could have done this without her noticing? The windows in her bedroom were always locked. The door always shut. No one had been in her apartment. Not unless, no. That was impossible. Her phone vibrated on the counter. She jumped, nearly dropping the photo. It was a text from an unknown number. She opened it. One word. Look. Her heart hammered. She spun around, scanning the apartment, every shadow suddenly sinister. Then she saw it. In the corner of her living room, just past the couch, there was a glint of metal. A camera lens. Small. Tiny. Almost invisible. She hadn't noticed it before. It was pointed straight at her bed. Her blood ran cold. Someone had been watching her. Not just anyone, but someone with access to her apartment. Someone who had been there while she slept. The rational part of her brain screamed to call the police. She grabbed her phone, dialed 911 and began to speak, her voice trembling. But before she could finish, there was a soft knock at the door. One slow, deliberate knock. She froze. The operator on the other end said something, but she couldn't hear it over the sound of her own heartbeat. Another knock, this time louder. She tiptoed to the door, peering through the peephole. The hallway was empty. No one. Her hands shook as she stepped back, trying to convince herself she was imagining it. Maybe it was the stress. Maybe she was just overtired. She placed the photo on the table, telling herself she would throw it away in the morning. But when she looked again, the photograph had changed. Her eyes widened in horror. Now she was sitting up in bed. Her hair was messy, her eyes wide with fear. The blanket was pulled down, tangled around her arms. And behind her, in the dim glow of the lamp, a shadow stood, a figure dark and indistinct just at the edge of the frame. She ran to the window, threw it open, and looked down at the street below. Nothing. Empty. Quiet. But the sense of being watched did not leave. Every sound in the apartment now seemed amplified. The hum of the fridge, the creak of the radiator, the faint scratch of something moving across the floor. Her phone buzzed again. Same number. Same single word. Sleep. She turned toward the bedroom door. The shadow in the photograph was no longer in the picture. It was in her room. Her scream caught in her throat. Something heavy hit the table, knocking the photograph to the floor. She scrambled backward, tripping over the rug, and the lights flickered once, twice, then went out entirely. In the darkness, she could hear it, soft, deliberate footsteps. 1, 2, 3, circling her. Closer and closer. And then a whisper, barely audible but unmistakable. You're awake now. The next morning, the neighbors found the apartment empty. The front door locked from the inside. The only thing left on the kitchen table was the photograph, new, fresh, and terrifyingly clear. It showed her sitting at the table, wide-eyed, staring directly at the camera, hands pressed against the wood as if she were trying to escape. No one ever saw her again. It was late on a Saturday night when three friends, Mark, Jenna, and Luis, were driving back from a small-town festival. The road they were on was long and winding, flanked by dense trees on either side. The kind of road that feels endless in the dark. Their laughter and music filled the car, keeping the chill of the night at bay, until they noticed it. A car, its hazard lights flickering, was pulled over on the side of the road. Alone. Someone needs help, Jenna said, pointing. Should we stop? Mark glanced in the rearview mirror, hesitant. It's late. Could be dangerous. Luis shrugged. Come on, it's probably just a breakdown. We can't drive past someone like that. The three friends slowed to a cautious stop. The car was old, black, and looked abandoned at first glance. But inside, a lone figure sat in the driver's seat, head down. Mark rolled down his window. "Hey, you okay?" he called. The figure didn't respond. Then, slowly the head lifted. A young man, pale, maybe in his early 20s, stared at them. His eyes were wide, almost pleading. I don't know what to do," he said, voice shaking. "I've been stuck here for hours. The engine won't start." Jenna's instinct kicked in. "We can help," she said. "Do you want to jump?" The man nodded, relief flooding his face. Mark got out, Luis right behind him, carrying jumper cables. As they approached, a strange silence seemed to descend over the road. Even the wind had died down. The kind of quiet that presses against your ears and makes your heart beat faster. "Don't worry, we've got you," Mark said. "Let's see what's wrong with this thing." They hooked the cables, laughed nervously as the car refused to start. The man fidgeted, glancing around like he expected something, or someone, to appear from the shadows. I really appreciate this," he whispered. "I don't know what I'd do if—" His voice trailed off. Finally, after a few attempts, the engine sputtered, coughed, and then died. Again. The friends exchanged frustrated looks. "Maybe we should just call a tow," Jenna suggested, pulling out her phone. The man's expression changed, panic rising in his eyes. "No, please. I just need to get out of here." Mark frowned. "Where exactly are you going?" The man swallowed hard. "Just anywhere. Anywhere but here." Luis's brows furrowed. "Do you want us to drive you?" The man hesitated, then nodded, climbing into the back seat without a word. They started driving, and for a few minutes, the only sound was the hum of tires on asphalt. But then a strange feeling settled over them, like the shadows on the trees were reaching closer, pressing in. "Where exactly do you live?" Jenna asked softly, trying to make conversation. The man shook his head. I can't tell you. I just need to get somewhere safe." They drove in silence, the road stretching endlessly. Then the man spoke again, voice trembling. "You shouldn't have stopped for me. They'll know." Mark glanced at him. "Who?" But before the man could answer, a flash of movement darted past the car. Something in the trees, too fast to see clearly. The friends tensed. Luis slowed the car. "Did you see that?" he asked, voice tight. The man didn't respond. He leaned forward, whispering into the space between them. "They're always watching. You don't understand." The road ahead twisted sharply, and Jenna's headlights caught the empty shoulder. No car, no figure, nothing. Just trees and darkness. "Where are you?" Mark asked, uneasy. The man shook his head. I'm not real. You can't see them yet, but..." Jenna's heart skipped. "What do you mean?" Before anyone could answer, he was gone. Just gone. No door opening, no footsteps, nothing. The back seat was empty. The car was just empty. Mark slammed the brakes, scanning the road. Where did he go? Luis opened the back door. Nothing. Not a trace. No footprints, no car tracks. Nothing. They tried to shake it off, thinking maybe it was some kind of prank. But when they drove past the spot where the stranded car had been, the shoulder was completely empty. No car. No man. No sign that anyone had ever been there. Hours later, at the next town, they stopped at a gas station. Mark, trying to rationalize, asked the attendant if anyone had reported a car breakdown nearby. The attendant blinked, confused. No. Nobody. There's been no accidents. No stranded cars. You sure it wasn't just a hallucination or something? The three friends exchanged uneasy glances. They knew what they had seen. They knew what they had felt. But the truth was impossible, and the memory kept gnawing at them. They never spoke of the man again. But months later, Mark would wake in the middle of the night, certain he could hear someone whispering his name from the back seat of his car. And Jenna, whenever she drives alone on dark roads, swears she can still see a shadow flicker at the edge of the trees, waiting, watching. Because some people, or things, call for help, and no one ever comes.